back to Storyboard 360. I hope everyone is doing well. Thank you to everyone that has subscribed and interacted with the videos. I really appreciate it. And thank you for joining me today for this case reflection. As the title states, I will be doing a case reflection on the 50-year-old unsolved murders of the Diggs family. So I came up with case reflections as a way for me to cover important details that I might have missed in regular videos and to discuss topics that are outside the scope of these regular videos, or to just give us a new perspective on the case as we get to explore new ideas or angles. So the case reflections will be a little less scripted. My hope for the future with the case reflections is to sometimes have maybe one other person where I can discuss just discuss the case and get their perspective. I love to hear just perspective of other people when it comes to unsolved cases. So I just hope, one day, and I will work on this. I just hope that in the future I will have a panel of people, even if it's one other person or multiple people, where we can just bounce ideas off each other. That's something I would love to do. And I believe, will we necessarily solve the case? Not necessarily, but at least it's bringing up fresh ideas, I think, and it's putting the story out there. And that's what we want to do. We want to keep the story out there in any way we can, as long as it's positive and respectful to the victims and their families, of course. So at this point, I'm going to do the recap of the case. So 50 years ago, on December 6, 1975, Wesley Diggs arrived home late in the afternoon and found his oldest daughter, 17-year-old Audrey, injured in a bedroom. Wesley rushed out and screamed to his neighbor that his daughter has been hurt and to call an ambulance. The neighbors who responded and entered the home confirmed that Audrey was dead. After alerting the police, Wesley Diggs' wife, 39-year-old Jean, and his other children, 16-year-old Allison, 12-year-old Wesley Jr., and 5-year-old Roger, were found dead. Jean Diggs, Audrey Diggs, Allison Diggs, Wesley Jr. Diggs, and Roger Diggs were all shot multiple times with a .22 caliber weapon. Based on the investigation, there was no evidence of forced entry, sexual assault, a struggle, or robbery. After passing two polygraph tests, Wesley was cleared by investigators. Wesley Diggs died in 1987, and unfortunately, as mentioned, after 50 years, the case is still unsolved. So I want to mention that the gun was never found, just a reminder. And also, there's one theory that was presented which I did not put forward in my first video because I just did not think that motive made any sense. There was, I think, one detective who had suggested that Jean Diggs had killed the children and somebody came in and killed her. Like maybe Wesley killed her when he saw that she had killed the children. I'm just presenting it now because you might see it somewhere and wonder why I didn't mention it, but it makes no sense to me. And I also encourage you, if you have a theory, you might agree with me on some things, you might disagree with me. Just feel free to put what you think, any theories you have, any questions or any feedback you have into the comment section. So despite this being a 50-year-old case, I believe the case is still solvable. Will it be easy? No, it won't be easy. And I'll talk about this a little bit later. First, I want to review how the original detectives handled the case. So, first of all, I already mentioned that clearing Wesley after he passed two polygraph tests, I believe that wasn't the right move. But I do understand, like, at the time in the 70s, a polygraph test was really the gold standard. Police relied heavily on that. Of course, we know today that even though some police officers and some detectives, they still use it, I believe, we just know it's not reliable. Personally, I give no weight at all to a polygraph test, but that's just my opinion. So Wesley did mention he accused the detectives, the original detectives, of being blinded by racism, and in the 70s, I don't doubt that what he was saying was applicable, and he also was not happy about the fact that they focused so much on his deaths. So basically, he was just saying the fact that they were focusing on the drug angle and his deaths was just because of racism. And we have to ask ourselves, did this racism, this alleged racism, cause detectives to have tunnel vision, and did this permanently impact the direction of the case? So basically, I believe, like, focusing on the drug angle so heavily, you have to ask, why did they focus on the drug angle? Was there anything in Wesley's history that would suggest that he had any interaction with that sort of thing? Or was it just because of his race, right? So that's something that we have to ask. Focusing on his debts, though, I don't disagree with that point. He did say that it was unfair that they focused on his debts because white businessmen could get $2 million in loans, right? And at that time, it would be easier for a white businessman to get a loan from a regular bank. But black business owners had to go the informal route. Makes sense. However, why I believe that the argument about the debts was relevant, or it's still relevant, is it was shown that because he went the informal route, the payments were just not the regular payments. They were probably a little bit on the high side, and his businesses were struggling. So he wasn't making like a lot of money to really be paying back the debt, and he had mortgages on the house. So I believe looking at the debt is relevant. That's a motive. That's a strong motive for somebody to want to wipe out their family, or to just commit murder, right? So I do see the point where he says the drug angle, they were so focused on that. I agree with him on that, that they went at maybe with that was there was too much focus on that, especially if there was nothing connecting him to that kind of activity. But the debt, looking at his debt, I totally believe that was something that needed to be done. I can see how focusing on the drug angle and the fact that Wesley said they ripped up his house. I'm going to talk about how that was a devastating action in terms of solving this case and how it impacted the case. Because we have to look at how the actions of the original detectives impacted the case in a lasting way. Because if it was already established, oh, the ideas that he was involved, connected to the drug world, and he had all these debts, then you have to wonder if the lack of progress is linked to that. This tunnel vision, not seeing other things. So the next thing I want to talk about, which I had forgotten to talk about in the first case, is the DNA. Finding DNA and how we could use this today. Unfortunately, I don't believe that evidence was collected for us to do this. So yes, it was the 70s, DNA wasn't a thing. That doesn't matter, right? If you collect the evidence properly and preserve the evidence properly, you can test it until you can match it with somebody, right? As the technology is improving, if you have a small, well preserved sample, that can help to solve a case. But based on, when Wesley said that they tore up his house looking for drugs, they, I just don't believe that they spent any time, or there was little attention played, or there's a little attention given to preserving evidence. I believe the scene was heavily compromised, right? So the neighbors went over there first, and then when the police came, and as Wesley had said, the house was ripped up they were looking for drugs. Unfortunately, the route of using DNA is no longer applicable. That's long gone. If evidence was properly collected in 1975, we would have a stronger opportunity to solve this case. I strongly believe that DNA evidence was left at that scene. There's no way that somebody came into the house, if you believe it's a stranger, and they did not leave DNA. And if the place was properly checked for, let's say, evidence, and evidence was collected of the victims, and we did not find any DNA from outside sources, that would say a lot to me. Because I just don't believe there's any way somebody came into that house, they went through that house. They went from the basement, they had to go upstairs to the bedrooms where the children were. Somebody would have left some DNA. And this is why we have to look at how detectives handle cases, especially when a case is unsolved. It helps us. We have to learn from the mistakes. We don't want to repeat them. And yes, it's 2026. People are well informed, but it doesn't mean we won't replay the same mistakes. And this is why I talk about these things. So the other question I have about this case is, why is it that the neighbors did not hear anything? So just a reminder that it is believed, or it has been suggested, that the murders happened between Friday at 11 p.m. and on Saturday at 2 a.m. Usually, it's the weekend. Even if people are inside their homes, most people aren't sleeping early. So why is it that the neighbors did not hear anything? And at 11 p.m., so late, I don't believe Jean. I believe Jean is the one who opened the door. Based on how the victims were found, Jean was found in the basement, and the children were upstairs, either in bed already or watching TV. So I strongly believe that Jean is the one that opened the door. I don't believe Jean would have opened the door at 11 p.m. or later than that to somebody she did not know at all. Or I just believe it was, even if it was an acquaintance, I just believe she knew that person. Is it possible that somebody came to the door and used an excuse that maybe, okay, Wesley was injured or something? That's of course possible. But I just don't put too much weight on the fact that this was a stranger based on just the time of day. So what I believe is, so the person comes to the door, she knows them, whether she knows them well or she just saw the person once or twice, it's just an acquaintance. So I believe they came to the door. Maybe it was something, I'm not sure what excuse they would have used, but remember that Wesley wasn't home. So it would have been either there's some, and I just believe they gave her some excuse probably related to Wesley. He's hurt, something is wrong, or she just knew the person and maybe they said they needed help, right? So I believe she opened the door. The person led her downstairs. They shot her downstairs and then they went upstairs. But the other question is, how did the children not hear anything, even if she was downstairs? And why is it that the children were found in such a relaxed state upstairs? So many questions to ask. Because the children were found in their bedrooms, and the way they were described to me, they weren't described as they were running up. You weren't. They weren't found in like an erratic, like they were stressing out or they were panicked, I should say. So many questions. Um, So let's say they did not hear the shot in the basement. How is it that the person goes upstairs, shoots the children, like shoots the first child, and then the other children are not like running or hiding, right? Is it that there was more than one person? That's the other question. Was it one person, which is possible, or were there two people who committed this crime? So the two of them come in, one of them one person leads Jane downstairs, the other one goes upstairs and is holding the children there. They can't move. But like I said, it still doesn't make sense. They were not like found in a panic. But this, maybe like I said, one person is downstairs with Jean, and then the other person is upstairs, just making sure that the children are not leaving their bedroom. It's really a very hard case to understand. So that's the part that I just don't get. I understand Jean being downstairs, but the children just being in their bedrooms. I'm trying to wrap my mind around that. And the other thing could be maybe the person found some way to keep it quiet. I don't know how they would have, but that's just something that I'm not clear about. So one thing I had mentioned is, did Wesley check up on his family? Because he was not there for the weekend. He was away from home for maybe a couple of days. Did the detectives ask him if he checked up on his family? That would have been significant. Did he hear anything out of the ordinary? Was there anything that he found weird, or was everything okay? And why would he not check up on his family when he's away? So there's something else I question about, as I was reviewing the case for this reflection is, I just found Wesley's behavior upon discovering Audrey's body very weird. And of course, I should have given a warning that we're talking about children being harmed. But the murders happen long before Wesley discovered Audrey's body. He discovered her on Saturday at 4 p.m., and the murders would have happened on Friday, the day before, between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. on Saturday. Why is it when he found her, when he discovered her body, he said she was hurt and to call an ambulance? It would have been so obvious right away, unfortunately, that Audrey was no longer alive. I just found that to be very odd. If I come home and my loved one is on the floor, I'm gonna rush over and be calling the person's name, shaking them, right? You would know right away that the person is no longer alive. So the fact that he did not recognize that, or it seemed that he did not recognize that, and then once the neighbors came over, immediately as the neighbor came in, she said Audrey was dead. Why did he not recognize that? I found that to be very odd. I mean, I do give him points for, he was trying to find answers on his own. He was pressuring the police to solve the case, but certain things I just don't make sense to me. So I had mentioned that original detective did seem to have, some sort of tunnel vision. They were just focused, locked in on the drug angle and the deaths. I wonder if they investigated Wesley's affairs and the person he was having affairs with. He said he was with his girlfriend at the time when the murders happened. Did the police speak to his girlfriend? This would have been so critical because we can't, as I said, we can't rule anybody out. I'm not saying he's guilty or innocent. I'm just saying for a case of this magnitude, for a crime of this magnitude, we have to keep everybody on the table until we can 100% rule them out. And I just think there are too many questions that are still unanswered. And I didn't see anything in my research about them necessarily pursuing that angle. I think doing a proper investigation on the people he was seeing outside of his marriage would have given us a lot more information. I think that would have been valuable to do that, but I don't see much about that. An important question is, what would be the motive? It just doesn't make sense. Why would somebody want to kill a family of four people, sorry, five people, and four of them being children? What was the motive? So some people at the police were saying maybe it was revenge. So Wesley was spared. He did not know. He wasn't able to say this is why the murders happened, because it has been said that when revenge is the motive, and if somebody's trying to send a message, they want you to get the message clearly. I just don't really believe if it's revenge. I just don't really think it's linked to his businesses or his debts. I just think it'll be more likely linked to the affairs or just something else. It doesn't make sense that his business, the people that he owed money, would kill his family, spare him, and he did not know. He just went off to live his life, right? He did not come out and say, "Oh, my family was killed because of my debts." So that revenge angle the revenge angle based on his debts doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't seem like the most likely. So, like I said, I want to come back to talking about why I think the case is still solvable. Even though it's a 50-year-old case, the person or persons who committed this crime could still be alive if we believe that it was not Wesley. I believe that in terms of the current work needed, we need this case should be in front of the public consistently and frequently. But unfortunately, I don't really see this in terms of the current detectives. I just believe it's too quiet for a case that has been described. This case has been described as the largest unsolved mass homicide in Bergen County's history. And I know one of the reasons they would say is it's an ongoing investigation. It has been described as being cold but active. What does active mean? Because I don't see anything that would suggest that it's active. And after 50 years, I just believe after 50 years we should not be holding back information anymore. So I believe one thing that should be happening right now is talking to the public, even if you really have no leads, or you're not just you just feel like you have nowhere to go. It would be good if they could do it every year, but at least every 2 years this case should be in the public. I just don't think that being quiet right now is going to help. After 50 years, the alliances I will not be as strong. Some people would have passed away. Right now is the time with social media. Go out into the public and put this case in the public's face. The fact that 5 people were murdered, 4 children. We need to be talking to the public about this. The other thing that's disappointing and surprising is that there's no reward for this case. I saw there was no reward being offered, and I think that's something else that needs to be done in order to get information. We have a reward has to be offered. So those are the main points I wanted to cover. Like I've said, time has forgotten these victims. Unfortunately, Wesley Diggs is not here anymore to defend himself or to help push this case, but it does not mean that the case should be forgotten. We should still be talking about this case. And to close out this reflection, I'm just going to mention the victims again. So in 1975, on December 6th, there were 5 victims. 39-year-old Jean Diggs, 16-year-old Allison Diggs, 17-year-old Audrey Diggs, 12-year-old Wesley Jr. Diggs, and 5-year-old Roger Diggs. Thank you for joining me for this case reflection. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.